Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Che Alaska webinar, which is titled The Toxic Legacy of U.S. Military Sites, Health and Human Rights for the People of Sivuqaq. My name is Sarah. I'm the Communications Coordinator with Alaska Community Action on Toxics, or ACAT. And Che Alaska is a program of ACAT and Collaborative for Health and Environment, and it's also part of Che's broader international coalition of over 5,000 individuals across the globe. And we'd love if you could also introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from, if you're from an organization. And I think the chat is enabled now, yeah, but we'll keep it off for the presentation. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, we'll have an audience Q&A at the last 20 minutes or so of our call. And you can use the Q&A box feature at the bottom of your screen for that. So today's webinar might be a bit longer than usual. It'll be around an hour and a half. And yeah, as I said, you'll be able to send your questions at any point throughout the webinar. So we have a few speakers, quite a few speakers with us today, and we're so happy they could join us. Unfortunately, Trisha Waghiyi is out this morning, so she won't be able to join us. And we'll see if Sandra Gallagher can also join us. But I'll jump right into introducing the rest of our panel of speakers. We have Waghiyi. She's a Sivuqaq Yupik Native Village of Savoonga tribal citizen, mother and grandmother. She has worked with ACAT since 2002 as the Environmental Health and Justice Director, and she was recently inducted into the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame just last year. And in 2021, she was appointed by President Biden to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Next, we have Cheryl Lowery. She's a community leader serving on the Alaska Nanut Co-Management Council, representing the Native Village of Gambell. And we have Pamela Miller. She's the founder and executive director of ACAT since 1997, and she brings more than 35 years of research, education, and advocacy experience to her work. She is also the co-chair of the International Pollutants Elimination Network, or IPEN, and she is the principal investigator for community-based research projects supported by the NIEHS. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and now I will hand it over to you, Vi, to start us off.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Bangunak. I'm the daughter of the late John and Della Waghiyi. My Appa Waghiyi was from Bunguk, Gangirme clan, and my Ningyok, my grandmother, Ayuklek, was from is of the Uwali clan. I'm a Sivuqaq Yupik grandmother, and I live and work here in Anchorage. And our office is located on the unceded territories of the Dena'ina people. And today we have Pam Miller, who's our executive director with Alaska Community Action on Toxics. She is my hero. She's mentored me from the beginning of this project. And I have a lot of love for Pam. She has done so much for our community on Sivuqaq, which is our traditional name for St. Lawrence Island. And she is executive director with Alaska Community Action on Toxics, and as well as co-chair of the International Pollution Elimination Network, which works, has about 400 to 600 individuals, organizations throughout the globe from about 180 nations that work at the Stockholm Convention to ban toxic chemicals globally. And we have Cheryl Lowery, who is from Sivuqaq. She is with Native Village in Gambell Council, and as well as Sivuqaq Incorporated. She's a financial officer there. She is Sivuqaq Yupik mother and grandmother, and we're so fortunate to have them both as well. And this project began when Annie Aloha, we like to recognize and honor her. She was a former health aide, a very well-respected elder and health aide who tried to get help for our people for 20 years. Annie had lived at Northeast Cape and started recognizing health harms that we now are linked to the two formerly used defense sites on our island. During the Cold War, the Air Force came and established 2 bases on our island because of our proximity to Russia. They came in the late 1940s to Gambell and built a base at the top of the mountain, Sivuqaq Mountain, and there was a big explosion. We're not really certain what caused it, but they moved the base to the base of Sivuqaq Mountain. And on the other end of our island, at Northeast Cape, the military came in the early 1950s. Because of, as I mentioned, because of our proximity to Russia, we were the eyes and ears of the North during the Cold War. A very important strategic location. We're approximately 40 miles from Russia. We're closer to Russia than mainland and Alaska. We're located in the Northern Bering Sea. And Annie tirelessly tried to get help for our people. When she noticed low birth weight babies, miscarriages, stillbirths, and high rates of cancers, especially our families who lived, worked, or camped at Northeast Cape. And it fell on deaf ears. And historically, just a quick background, there used to be 10,000 of us, and some of our elders think up to 20,000 of us on Sivuqaq in 32 communities before Western contact. And today we have 2 communities left. I was born and raised in Savoonga. We have approximately 900 to 1,000 people, and our sister community, approximately 800 to 900 people. And when Annie and Pam met in Anchorage at a women's conference, that's basically how this project began. And we are a nonprofit, small woman-led organization. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to learn about what's happening, not only from the legacy military toxics we've been facing, but also persistent organic pollutants we now know arrive in the Arctic through air and ocean currents. And now the Arctic Ocean has the most microplastics. These are burdens we didn't create. We have had our own community-based project since 2000. At the direction of our leadership, we tested the blood of our people, and we now know our people have 4 to 10 times higher PCBs than the average American in the lower 48. We partner with our tribes who are help design the research, what data to collect, and this data belongs to our people. And they recognize we're not the only community whose lands, airs, and waters and people have been harmed from legacy military toxics, and they want us to share this information. And as part of our community-based project, we have elders, youth, current and past leadership who give us advice and guidance. We're one of the few in the nation who have our own community-based project, and we have identified PCBs, pesticide massive fuel spills, and so many toxic chemicals. There was an agreement Native Village of Savoonga signed with the military in 1952, and that agreement was never honored. So we have been struggling to hold the military accountable since they abandoned Northeast Cape. In the agreement, it very specifically, basically, the statement stated we wanted our lands turned back in the same condition as when we turned it over. And the military has not honored that agreement. We welcome the military Our grandfathers and fathers volunteered for the Alaska Territorial Guard. We help rescue down planes. We still have a lot of young men and women that serve in the armed forces. And we now feel that the military has turned their back on us. And that's just a brief description. And we're facing health harms never seen before in our people, including what Andy witnessed, but on health harms linked to PCB exposure include heart disease, strokes, diabetes, thyroid disease, birth defects, along with the cancers, low birth weight babies, miscarriages, stillbirths. And now we know these toxic chemicals are endocrine disrupting chemicals. They affect our hormone systems and can affect our children's ability to learn. Our current project is protecting future generations. So in March, the week of March 10th, we brought a delegation up to Washington, D.C., and the first one was in 2009. And after the 2009 delegation, Northeast Cape was at the bottom of the cleanup list. But after that delegation, it went to the top of the cleanup list. And we felt that we needed to bring another delegation. We've exhausted all efforts trying to hold the military accountable. So we had meetings with high officials back to back the week of March 10th. We had a press conference with Dr. Marcos Orellana, who's United Nations Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Health, and with our delegation, to announce that we had filed a human rights complaint to have the Special Rapporteur investigate the health harms we now know are linked to legacy military toxics. Our basic human rights to health, our basic human rights to food and subsistence, free and prior informed consent, have all been violated. So we filed the complaint to have the UN investigate the violations to our lands, airs, water, and our people. And we met with Army Corps of Engineers. We met with Department of Defense. We had a congressional briefing with the Senate Indian Affairs Committee staff, but we also had a solidarity event. And this was a culmination of 20 since 2000 to show that, to voice our grievances as we have been struggling to hold the military accountable. And we had some very powerful speakers, and we're so grateful to have Cheryl here. Tricia, as Sarah mentioned, has the flu, and Sandra may be having difficulties joining us. And with that, I just wanted to introduce you to Cheryl and share her personal story of how these legacy military toxics and hazards have harmed the health and well-being of our Sivuqaq Yupik people. Cheryl?
Hi, I have been a finance officer for over 30 years. I worked a long time at the Native Village of Gambell as a finance officer. I managed grants for the Department of Defense cleanup starting in the 90s and 2000s, and we applied for this home back in 95, 96. We were excited to be one of the last people to get a home. As you know, in the villages, it's hard to get homes. But when they were digging up to place the foundation, a lot of homes were placed on, toxic debris. The linemen for laying the water and sewer would have to be in the pits for a couple of minutes and get out because their face and their eyes and their nose and their lungs were burning from unknown toxic, highly toxic, if they were to get in and out of those pits. I can't count how many homes in this area that are local men. They were only local men to be getting into these pits to try to get these 20 homes hooked up to water and sewer, which caused me to go over to the DOD office and speak with them. At the time, I was shown a map of old debris, old sites that were unknown debris that were buried, like our elders had talked about, the ones that served and worked alongside with the military back then. They did point out all the sites that were buried. They talked about barrels and barrels of unknown liquid, whatever, toxics in barrels. And not just that, but the equipment and other building sites that they had demolished and buried. Not only is my house here currently sitting on contaminated toxics, but my old house as well, according to the old map that I had seen. At the time, Carrie Kosoboom was one of the bosses for Army Corps of Engineers. I was concerned because I had young children at the time. He was telling me that they could do nothing once buildings and structures are built on toxic debris. I believe that our school is sitting on as well, our playground, our water plant, possibly city, other homes, not just in my area, but other areas alongside the lake. There were sites at the beach where things were buried, where we fish and hunt and butcher meat that are harvested from our hunters that go out on boating trips to obtain our food, traditional food. I myself have been fighting for my life starting in 2010. I started out with 8 tumors, which almost took my life. I had to get emergency surgery to stop the bleeding from the 8 tumors that I had growing drastically in a short period of time. Not only that, but I quit counting after 12 and other parts of my body. I'm still fighting. I'm still going to be here. I'm going to fight for my family. I have 2 children that had moved and traditionally to be raised with their grandparents, which now they have children. I have 2 other daughters that lived with me their whole lives, and now they cannot have children. Nobody in the United States would actually live and go to school on these sites had they known. We are not fortunate to be able to move our homes or move out of here. So we have to stay here and fight for our health. Not just that, but we also have numerous other health issues that we are dealing with. My daughter-in-law, she lives at my old house with my son. She's a cancer survivor. She had thyroid cancer starting back in 2019 and recently got help for surgery. She continues to go and get screened so that that cancer doesn't come back. These sites need to be on the list. When I spoke with Kerry Kosovoom, and I went back later after he told me they can't come 300 feet to any structure. When he left, I went back to look at the site, the map where the sites are, and the map was gone. Nowhere to be found. So I feel like my life was just tossed aside, but yet I'm still here fighting for my life. Something needs to be done, continued to be investigated, tested, not only myself, but there's a lot of cancer. A lot of people have died from cancer, some still, and all the way down to young children are getting cancer. So I am speaking up for my people, not just my personal story here. We need help. We're reaching out. We'll continue to reach out. Something needs to be done. Thank you.
Cheryl, such a powerful personal story. As you can see, we now feel that the military has turned their back on us. As Cheryl shared, from her heart, what we're seeing in our people, our families, our children, as she mentioned, is so personal. That is why we're dedicated and committed on our community-based project to continue to monitor Northeast Cape and at Gambell, because these sites have never been properly characterized. And the cleanup was closed too soon. And our party was not even, our tribe was not even a party to the record of decision. Our tribes are sovereign. The federal government has an obligation, government to government consultation and participation. And that there's never been truly meaningful participation. That is why we, at the request of Annie, who asked for Pam's help to continue her work, we hire and train local people. As I mentioned, we have advice working group that give us advice and guidance, and our tribes are our partners. And so we felt that it was another time to bring a delegation to Washington, D.C. As I mentioned, we've exhausted all efforts. Northeast Cape, there's still ongoing unlined monofills, legacy military toxics, including a massive 220,000 gallons massive fuel spill that we know of. When this spill occurred, Northeast Cape used to have the most abundant fish at the Sivuqaq River. It wiped out the fish. There's no more seal haulouts, no more tomcod fishing. And the agreement even mentioned these special vulnerable locations, including the seal haulouts. And when the spill happened, the 220,000 gallons, the ice turned yellow. The birds were yellow. And when the community of Northeast Cape, there were about 130 people that lived there. And when the community and leadership of Northeast Cape, the Native Village of Northeast Cape, notified the community in Savoonga. So our men came by boats. And I have a elder interview that stated that when they were coming by boat, they can smell this fuel 15 miles away, the devastation from the massive fuel spill. It wiped out the fish, where in Annie's words, there used to be the most abundant fish at Northeast Cape, at the Sivuqaq River and the estuary. And the Army Corps has told us that even after 50 years, when we give our people give our knowledge of how this spill, even after all these years, there's a sheen and plumes that come up, and we can smell it. And they tell us natural. The Army Corps has told us that it's naturally occurring, and it's biogenic. Yes, we now know that the Arctic is a hemispheric sink, but the congener-specific analysis we have done with our community-based project, we now know the sources from local, what was abandoned from at Northeast Cape, that come through the Arctic through air and ocean currents. We're able to discern what is local that was spilled, buried, or abandoned at Northeast Cape and at Gambell, than from what comes through air and ocean currents. So it's been very difficult. We were at Northeast Cape last summer. We're committed to continue to monitor Northeast Cape and Gambell, knowing they've never been properly characterized. And, you know, this is so personal. My father died of cancer. The hospital in Nome kept sending him home. By that time, he had to buy his own ticket and came to Anchorage. It was too late. My mother had a stillborn child after me. Heart disease, strokes, diabetes, mental health harms, and cancer. We buried my brother to cancer 2 years ago. I'm a cancer survivor, and I've had 3 miscarriages, all health harms linked to PCBs. So, you know, I can't see myself doing anything else. You know, I had no experience in this field. However, when ACAT did the press release about the PCB levels in the blood of our people in 2002, in the front page of the Anchorage Daily News, I read the article, and I was really moved, and because I knew about the former bases. My dad had helped build the base at Northeast Cape and lived there. And I knew about all the cancers in our people, but I had never put the two together. And I would like to acknowledge Sterling Gallagher, who was the first project coordinator. And after her, June Martin. June was the project coordinator at the time. We would run into each other. I was a stay-at-home mom for 6 years before I took this position 22 years ago. And I had a job offer on my answering machine the same week the front page article about the PCB levels in the blood of my people was released. I had no experience. I really thought about it. But I knew that it was my calling. So it's very difficult and personal. However, I never knew there was so much injustice globally. Alaska has 700 formerly used defense sites. A lot of them all on the north coast, the western coast of Alaska, all the way down to the Aleutian. Here in South Central, we have 700 current and former bases. And there's 9,000 in the United States. And what I've come to learn is that the military is the largest polluter on the planet. So that's why we are committed. And in Annie's words, I will fight until I melt. And with this, I would like to turn it over to Pam Miller, who will talk about the data that we have in our peer-reviewed published articles. And I just want to share briefly, our tribe wants us to share this data. As I,
Vi,
yes,
may I speak a moment before I get off?
yes, definitely.
Okay. You know, Trisha was a strong voice as well. And I would like to comment on her behalf of all the suicides that happened on the island. She was advocating for youth that had, you know, mental issues and committed suicide. I would like that to be brought to the table as well, because she learned early on of what was going on and tried to help, and she really advocate for our youth. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but being that Trisha was not on here, I wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Cheryl. And Tricia was our youth representative, and thank you. And more science is showing links to mental health harms and toxic exposures. And it's so important that we continue to do our research. Thank you, Cheryl. I know you have to run off to another meeting. It was an honor to have you. I love you, and you have been such a strong voice, not only for your family, your daughters, yourself, but the community of Gambell and Savoonga and Sivuqaq. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I love you all too. Let's continue to work for the betterment of our people for the island, and not just them, but for everyone else with flood sites that are not taken care of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Cheryl. It
Yes.
was just really, truly an honor to be with you in Washington, D.C., and the rest of the Sivuqaq delegation.
Yes, I'm very honored to be here supporting you, and I will continue to support in any way I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like,
Bye.
bye.
Just want to make sure you can see my presentation.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Vi, and it's just been wonderful to work with you for these many years, to work toward holding the military accountable, industries accountable, and it's just, yeah, it's been great. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some of the findings of our community-based research that we've done over the past 25 years in partnership with the tribes and several different universities. And in some, our studies show long-term intergenerational harm associated with the military contamination on Sivuqaq. And we've worked in partnership with the tribes over these many years. And this research really affirms the knowledge and wisdom of the elders and other knowledgeable people of Sivuqaq. They witnessed the harm, they witnessed the health disparities, and yet were not taken seriously by the regulatory agencies, the Corps of Engineers. So our data actually really affirms the knowledge that exists there, that has not been respected by the agencies that should be working in the interest of protecting environmental and human health. And Vi talked about Annie Aloha. This is Annie at Northeast Cape at the military site, and she was a community health aide who really was the one to understand and describe the health disparities associated with the exposures from the military site at Northeast Cape. So she was extremely knowledgeable. She brought her knowledge and wisdom and had tried reaching out to many different agencies for many years. And unfortunately, she was not taken seriously. So in 1997, we began working together, and that's what really started this project that was funded starting in 2000 by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And she continues to inspire our work every day. And I know Vi described the location of Sivuqaq, also known as St. Lawrence Island in the northern Bering Sea, but just to give you a visual of that. Oh, and on the left here, you can see the Chukotka Peninsula of Russia from Gambell here. So you can see how close it is, and that's really why these military bases were established there, as Vi mentioned, because of the close proximity to Russia during the Cold War. These are some photographs of the military site at Northeast Cape. So they abandoned this huge complex infrastructure here. They disposed of PCBs, fuels, heavy metals, and pesticides on site, either buried them in very shallow pits or just left them on the surface. This is a quick summary of all the types of community-based research that we've done out there. So the first step was really to interview elders, and Vi did a lot of that. We have recordings of many elders and leaders, some now who have passed. So that was really an important, I think, first step in guiding this research. But we've done all these different types of sampling to document both the impacts of the long-range transport of chemicals into this region of the Arctic, and also the military contamination, both at Gambell and Savoonga. And Vi spoke about the health disparities. These are the ones that we've documented through interviews as well as our own research. High rates of cancer, endocrine disruption, including thyroid disease and diabetes, heart disease, and these reproductive health effects that Vi also mentioned, including developmental and learning disabilities. One of our first projects at the request of the tribes was to document the levels of PCBs in the blood serum of the people of Sivuqaq. And we found elevated levels. Everyone on the island had elevated levels of PCBs because of the long-range transport of this persistent toxic chemical into this region of the north that arrived on wind and ocean currents. But, and these levels were 4.5 to 9 times higher than an average level that you would find in a person in the lower 48. But in addition to that, we found even higher levels among the people who had close familial ties with Northeast Cape. So you can see on the graph here, Gambell, Savoonga on the right, and then the people at Northeast Cape have the highest levels of any of the other people on the island. We've done quite a lot of environmental sampling at Northeast Cape. This is Northeast Cape again, because the military did a very poor job at documenting the nature and extent of contamination. We measured levels of chemicals that the military wasn't even testing for, like the pesticide Mirex. This study, and I'll share a list of all our peer-reviewed publications at the end of the presentation, but this study in particular documented elevated levels of mercury and PCBs in a fish that's really important for the traditional diet of the people of Sivuqaq, Dolly Varden. And you can see here that the elevated levels are associated with the military site and higher levels downstream from the military site. In the beginning of this project, we worked with scientists who had developed models for sentinel fish species, including stickleback, and blackfish as well. And turns out these fish are really important indicator species to show not only the levels of contaminants, but health effects associated with those contaminants. And what we found was, even after many, many years of site remediation, the stickleback and the blackfish have really high levels of PCBs that are interrupting and disrupting the endocrine function, particularly the thyroid and reproductive systems of these fish. And we've also documented the effects of these contaminants on gene expression and particularly those that are responsible for repairing gene mutations, which is an indicator of cancer. So these fish essentially mirror the contaminant patterns and the diseases that we're also finding in the people of St. Lawrence Island. And then also in the middle picture here is Troutman Lake, which is adjacent to the community of Gambell, which also has a military site that Cheryl talked about. And we found elevated levels, really exceptionally high levels of the flame retardants, the polybrominated diphenyl ethers, and certain of the PFAS chemicals, the forever chemicals, in the stickleback of Troutman Lake. And this is particularly concerning because the children of the community play in this. It used to be the water source, and this lake is actually interconnected with the aquifers of the island. So the contamination is really quite extensive, and the substrate here is cobble, so that water travels quite freely underneath the island, and the water source is incredibly vulnerable. We've also, in addition to the PCB study in blood serum, we've also measured high levels of the polybrominated diphenyl ethers as well as the PFAS chemicals, these in particular PFOS and PFNA, at really high detection levels. And although the serum PFAS levels are comparable to levels in the US general population, even though this is a extremely remote location, the PFNA and PFUNDA are two PFAS chemicals that we found elevated in comparison with levels in the lower 48. And these contaminant levels were linked with disruption of thyroid function in the people. So this is my last slide. This is a slide of our Sivuqaq and Alaska Community Action on Toxics delegation recent trip to Washington, D.C. And these are, and Sarah will make this presentation available to everybody, but these are some of our peer-reviewed published papers that we have in the literature. These are all on our website. And I'll just say again that in summary, the people who have close familial connections with Northeast Cape have higher levels of PCBs in their blood. We also found elevated levels of certain organochlorine pesticides such as DDT, Mirex, mercury, and HCB. I described the problems that we found in the stickleback that really mirror what's happening with the health and in concentrations of these contaminants in people. And collectively, these studies suggest that exposure to these persistent chemicals at Northeast Cape really adversely affect health, not only in the fish, but in people. So this is really compelling evidence over many years of research out there in collaboration with the tribes, the Native Village of Savoonga and the Native Village of Gambell. And we have continuing work out there to assess exposures in island residents, as well as additional efforts to document the environmental contamination at Northeast Cape. So there are a number of entities that I really want to thank. First of all, the tribes of the Native Village of Savoonga, Native Village of Gambell, who've been such great partners throughout this whole time. I also want to thank the University of California at Berkeley Environmental Law Clinic. I see Chloe Smith is on the call, but Steve Castleman, Claudia Polsky, as well as contributions from law students over the past couple of years that led to the filing of our complaint with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Toxics. I also want to acknowledge the National Institute of Environmental Health Science for supporting this research, and a number of our university partners, University at Albany, University of Alaska, Northern Arizona University, University of Arizona, Middlebury College, the University of Oregon, and Emory University have all been working in partnership on this project. And I see a number of friends on this webinar. So shout out to Ella Cardoza, who helped us do research last summer at Northeast Cape, Chloe, and I see some friends from Coming Clean, Stephanie and Maya. So thank you for joining the call. We have, and we'll make available the actual complaint that we filed with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Toxics. But essentially, we are asking the US government to honor the 1951 agreement that Vi mentioned. We're asking them to open the cleanup and remediation efforts at both Northeast Cape and Gambell, and then a number of other things really to hold the military accountable for the responsible and health protective cleanup of the formerly used defense sites, both at Gambell and at Northeast Cape. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you everybody for participating. Thank you, Sarah Bonapur, for organizing this. And I think we would welcome any questions or comments.
Yeah,
Can I just,
great.
I'm sorry, can I just add briefly to the request that we have, along with what Pam mentioned? And I just wanted to mention that the US government must ensure that the residents of Northeast Cape that are currently displaced can return to Northeast Cape and restore it so that we can have a thriving year-round community. As I mentioned, we had about 130 people who are now displaced because of the legacy military toxics, and as well as and our people have been requesting a formal apology for the harm and human rights violations it has inflicted on our people at Sivuqaq. And I just wanted to, since Tricia was not here, I wanted to add a quote that was shared on our Facebook page. And I want to thank Cheryl for reminding me of Tricia's contributions during the meetings with high officials and at the press conference. But her quote goes, "Those before me have been protecting our lands, and now I want to help protect the lands and speak for those who can't speak for themselves." She is a great-granddaughter of Annie Aloha and has committed to be a voice, as she mentioned, for those that can't speak for themselves. And since Sandra was not able to join us, I wanted to share her quote. She's a tribal council member in the Native Village of Savoonga. And her quote goes, "I am a grandmother. I am doing this for my grandchildren. I want them to be healthy and self-sufficient and not suffer like our generation has with the pain of all the deaths in our family and community from cancer." And lastly, Merle Apasangak, who is an elder and leader from Native Village of Gambell, his quote, "We have always been a vigilant people. Our community-based research enables us to be vigilant at the molecular level. And Sivuqaq was always known as a place of wellness prior to the contamination by the military. And we are working to restore it again as a place of wellness."
Thank you so much, Vi. Very powerful to hear you speak, and thank you, Pam. I think we can move into the Q&A now. So if you haven't sent in your questions, please go ahead and do that. Now's the time. Maybe we can just start with this first one about how the Northeast Cape area can be restored, and what I think these are some requests are mentioned in the complaint, but could you talk more about that and what kind of compensation for either?
Well, I can start. All along, we've advocated for innovative cleanup technologies. We don't know if this site can be truly returned to the pristine nature that it was before the military occupied there. But we advocated for technologies that go beyond the usual dig and incinerate methods that the military uses to clean up sites like this, that they have not employed. But there are a lot of different technologies, including peroxidative technologies to break down these contaminants on the site. Bioremediation technologies are also more and more promising, I would think. And we don't want these contaminants to be foisted on other communities. Right now, Alaska doesn't have any designated hazardous waste sites, so that any contamination has to be dug up, containerized, and shipped off the island to a hazardous waste site in Oregon. So that's just not acceptable. And we think that it's really necessary to not only protect the communities of Sivuqaq, but also protect other communities that are located in and around these hazardous waste sites. So that's why we've been really advocating for more innovative and effective remediation technologies.
Thank you. I see another question about what kinds of military activity led to the dumping or the contaminants, and what these chemicals were used for.
Vi, do you want to take that one?
As I mentioned, they came in the late 1940s to Gambell and established a base at Northeast Cape in the early 50s. So these formerly used defense sites before satellite, they were important bases during the Cold War. They built these humongous structures called White Alice sites, and they needed a lot of power, so they used transformers. And they were big structures. You can see the remnants of them throughout the state. As I mentioned, there's lots of formerly used defense sites in our state. They requested a lot of power. They used, and for the transformers, they needed a solvent that can withstand a lot of friction and heat. And that solvent they used had PCBs. As Pam mentioned, there was also pesticides, heavy metals, solvents, massive fuel spills. And we feel that the pesticide was used for, what is that? Insecticide because it was a pretty big installation, several hundred personnel. So these are toxic chemicals that we've identified there, and maybe Pam can give more description. But however, we hire and train local people. Our community health researchers are on the ground collecting the environmental samples. Our people are truly involved in the citizen science. And all those 16 peer-reviewed journal articles, it's so important that Western science acknowledges our Indigenous people's knowledge that is on par or greater than Western science. So our community health researchers have this long history of Indigenous people's knowledge. For us to have lived where we have, which some people feel is some of the harshest locations on the planet. So it's important that as an organization that our community health researchers are also co-authors in all these papers. We are just not research subjects. So they left a legacy of harmful hazards and toxics.
Thank you, Vi. I see another question. If you've received any response from the US government since the March trip to DC, and if there's any planned research or remediation projects.
Well, we have had positive responses from our congressional delegation, which is good because they can hold these agencies accountable. It's very difficult in Washington, D.C. right now and the federal government generally, but we are not giving up, and we will follow up with the complaint to the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, because he can also do a lot to hold these agencies accountable. And we will follow up with and have sent follow-up letters to every single agency that we met with, including the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Defense, EPA, and we will not let them off the hook. So we're definitely not giving up. We have follow-up meetings scheduled. So there's a lot of work yet to be done, but we're very committed to it.
Thank you. And then I see a couple of questions that are kind of similar about what can people in the lower 48 do to support the people of Sivuqaq, and or organizations that could help lift up demands to the government, anyone we could contact to raise the importance and the urgency of the complaint.
Just share our story. You know, we have a wealth of information on our website about our community-based project. Sarah shared the statement of purpose and other reports that came out of this Washington, D.C. trip. As I mentioned, we're not the only community who's been struggling to hold the military accountable. Contact our decision makers. A lot of times we're never at the table when decisions are made for us, generally miles and miles away, because we're so far removed from the lower 48. And we're on a remote island. The only access is by small bush plane. And sometimes due to inclement weather, we don't get planes for a week. So share our story, contact your own decision makers. You know, it's important that we hold these industries and military industrial complex accountable. I never knew there was so much injustice to learn that there's 130,000 chemicals produced and manufactured, and very few are ever tested for their safety before they're put in the products we bring into our homes, workplaces, or communities like mine who rely on subsistence foods. These toxic chemicals are ending up in our traditional foods. As I mentioned, the Arctic is a hemispheric sink. They're very persistent, don't break down easy. They're ending up in our marine mammals, so at such high levels that have very concerning health harms linked to them. And to now know that the Arctic Ocean has the Arctic Ocean has the most microplastics. It's so important that we educate ourselves, because state and federal agencies who are supposed to look out for our lands, airs, and waters and people know what's going on, but do not let the average person know. You know, as I mentioned, these toxic chemicals are in our personal care products, our cleaning products, the carpet padding on and furniture foam, hard casing of electronics. You know, we should all be up in arms. And, you know, it's unethical practices of these multinational corporations and the military industrial complex to violate the basic human rights of communities like mine and throughout the nation and globe.
Thanks, Bye. And there are quite a few questions here, so for our speakers, if you'd like to pick one out to highlight, go ahead. I see one question, just this first one, about what about the safety of traditional foods, subsistence foods, and if the military had anything provided. This is the first one from Melinda.
Thank you, Melinda. That's a great question. As I mentioned, the agreement specifically mentioned the seal haulouts and other vulnerable locations that our leadership, who met for 3 days when they first asked to come to our community, our elders and leaders met for 3 days. And to make a decision to grant, if we wanted to grant them use. And so when the massive fuel spill happened, as I mentioned, it wiped out the fish, it wiped out the seal haulouts. There's no more seal haulouts, no more tomcod fishing. As I mentioned, the fish, the most abundant fish on our island were wiped out at the Sivuqaq River. The Dolly Varden are just now starting to return. And when this happened, it created a food security for our people. And no, they did not provide food or bottled water. What our mothers and children had to do was to go to the dumps to look for food that the military had discarded in their dump sites just to eat, to survive. As I mentioned, that's why we're filing this human rights complaint. As I mentioned, human rights to food and subsistence, human right to health, our basic human rights were violated, and we are committed to hold them accountable. Thank you for that great question.
Yeah, thank you. How about this one question from Ella about more about the community science aspect? Has there been any hydrogeological site investigation done to characterize the aquifers on FUD sites on Sivuqaq?
Thanks for that question, Ella. I would say there's been limited hydrogeological characterization of both the sites at Gambell and Savoonga. The U.S. Geological Survey did some in early years, back in the 60s and 70s. And then the Corps of Engineers came in and did some very superficial hydrogeological assessments, but again, very, very poor, really. And so I don't feel that the efforts there are complete. More is needed. And I think more independent hydrogeological work is needed. One of the scientists that we worked with early on in our project was Dr. Ron Scrutato. He was a geologist, so he did a lot to characterize the geology, particularly at Northeast Cape as well as at Gambell. So we had the benefit of his knowledge, and he was an advisor to the St. Lawrence Island or Sivuqaq Restoration Advisory Board that we helped establish. So that really helped also guide the work that we did, where we sampled, and how to characterize the extent of the contamination.
Thanks. How about this next question? Has there been any cooperation or communication with other similarly affected communities in northern Canada?
Not specifically in northern Canada. I'm not aware of, Pam.
Mm-hmm.
However, we
Yeah.
have, go ahead.
Oh, well, we've done presentations and shared this information very widely, and we have had a number of requests from communities affected by military contamination, because the dew line sites, or the distant early warning sites, as you're probably aware, extend from Alaska all the way across the northern coast of Canada and Greenland. So there are many, many similar sites that the military left that are contaminated with PCBs and the other contaminants that we talked about. In particular, there's one in Greenland where people there were severely affected by PCBs exposures, to the extent that that they had no no boys being born in that community. And we think that's because of their exposure to estrogenic chemicals such as PCBs. So we've had some communications, mostly inquiries and share interest in the sharing of our papers and presentations.
I do want to mention briefly, in 2005 to 2009, we got a grant to continue our work on Sivuqaq, but expand to the Northern Sound region. And we did work with a Brevik Mission and Teller, Elam, Unalakleet, Stebbins, and as well as did environmental research in and around Nome. And we worked on a report formerly used to fence in the Northern Sound region. We identified 32 flood sites in the Northern Sound. As I mentioned, you know, we have the 700 current and former bases. We're not the only community who's been struggling to hold the military accountable. And out of those 32 sites, 3 are still classified. And regarding Northeast Cape, that ranked high enough for the National Priorities List or Superfund, it was never placed. We've been trying to get the scoring. The military has not been transparent, and so it's you know, that's why we're dedicated and committed to hold them accountable.
I wanted to come back and add something in response to Steph's question about what people in the lower 48 might be able to do. And yes, it's incredibly important to share this story, and that's really helpful. But in addition to that, call upon your own members of Congress. They might be on committees that deal with these kinds of issues. So call upon your own members of Congress. Our ultimate goal is to hold the military accountable here. And also, you know, you can also reach out to Marcos Orellana to make sure that he does the follow-up work necessary to investigate this case, and we can provide contact information.
Thank you. This is sort of similar to that previous question about communities facing similar issues. This last question from Robin, do you think that if you win your major legal battles, that this will help many other communities around the US dealing with similar issues?
Well, I think both are. If you want to go.
It was, whether we win or not, you know, we will set a precedence. And our goal is to hold them accountable. And, you know, it's decision, you know, there's no oversight. That's why we had to meet with EPA, Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. They let the military off the hook. And there's measures in place to protect the military, like CERCLA. So we all need to work, like Pam said, contact your legislators, contact Marcos Orellana. The work we're doing to hold them accountable, hopefully will make a ripple effect. Like I mentioned, we're not the only community. Thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what I was going to say, Vi. So I think our goal here for sure is to set a precedent, not only for legal action, but for the community-based research we hope is a model that other communities may be able to use in terms of our methods and the ways that we've done this to document the contamination as well as the levels of contaminants in people and wildlife and adverse health outcomes, particularly endocrine disruption, mutations, and other ways that we've gone about doing this, which is very methodical. And we hope, again, that it is useful to other communities facing similar kinds of situations. And I will say that it's it's really a crime that communities affected by whether it's military or industrial contamination have to bear the burden of proof. Because we know in this case that the Corps of Engineers has not done a good job of documenting the extent of the contamination, nor has it taken seriously the health harms associated with the military activities. So the burden of proof has been on the tribes of Sivuqaq, who work in partnership with us to do this scientific work and to also make sure that the voices of the people, the knowledge and wisdom of the people are represented whenever we meet with agencies, whether it's in Washington, D.C., in Juneau, or Geneva. We always make sure that people are properly represented because the agencies don't always care to listen.
Yes. They can, you know, you heard Cheryl call out the project manager. They were patronizing, disrespectful. And, you know, the school, the playground, the homes that Cheryl lives in are on top of the waste site, the municipal buildings. And the drinking water in Gambell is very vulnerable. So, you know, that's one of the asks that we had in our state during our meetings, because as I mentioned, the vulnerability of the drinking water is intensifying due to increasing storm surges, melting permafrost that are accompanied by rapid climate change. And also, as I mentioned, our people in Savoonga that are now displaced that lived at Northeast Cape want to return to our home. You know, there was a community there, a tribe, a school. You know, my mother and my siblings, we lived there every summer for 5 years. And we were a family of 8, and half of us have gotten cancer. Not only my immediate family, I've lost so many family members to cancer. Not only cancer, heart disease, strokes, diabetes. You know, our wombs are our child's first environment. As Pam mentioned, these toxic chemicals can mimic hormones and disrupt our endocrine systems. How are we able to conceive and carry our children and have a healthy birth for the mom and child because of these toxic exposures? And now, due to the concerns of our leadership and community, due to concerns of our children's learning ability, how can we pass on our languages, our creation stories, our songs and dances and traditions and cultures if our children can't learn? This was very alarming to me because, as I mentioned, our Indigenous people's knowledge, the ability to predict the weather months away, the migration patterns of the wildlife our people have relied on. Our people can look at the cloud formations and the horizon and the moon, and basically our own citizen science has, as we mentioned, the Creator gave us everything we ever needed to survive in what some people call the harshest locations on the planet. We thrived, and in Merle's words, we're working to restore Sivuqaq again to be a place of wellness.
Thank you, Vi. We can just go through these last few questions. Is there anything specific scheduled for the next few months in terms of community participatory research or community science?
Well, several things. We have a lot of our environmental and human blood serum samples in various laboratories, and we're waiting for the analytical results. This is for the Northeast Cape project. We're planning to go back out, if at all possible, to Northeast Cape this summer to gather more samples, water samples, fish samples, and other traditional food samples, but we have some limiting factors with regard to access to the site. So we're not sure that we're going to be able to make it back out there this summer, but we do have a lot of samples to analyze, interpret the data, present the results back to the communities. First of all, before we even would consider publishing them outside, we present the results back, and then we get permission from the tribes before we publish that information in any kind of scientific peer-reviewed journal or share it outwardly.
Yeah, if I can just add, as part of our Sivuqaq project, we add funding to offer week-long college credited courses to tribes, to communities, to youth, mothers, grandmothers, to teach communities how to do their own environmental research, whether it's environmental and health research. We have funding to do a Children's Environmental Health Summit as part of our Protecting Future Generations. We want to convene children's healthcare professionals, decision makers, to convene on Sivuqaq to make sure meaningful changes are in place to protect our most vulnerable, our children. We want to find a way to have an all-government approach to address the health harms where our people are facing. It's not a matter of if we'll get cancer, but when. So we want to have a convening with Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, and our healthcare providers in the region to find a way, as I mentioned, to make sure measures are in place to protect our children's health and well-being. And also, ACAT, we have a wealth of information. We get requests from communities who have exhausted all efforts trying to get help for themselves, their family, community, or region. That's why ACAT was established. Pam saw a need and created our organization. We're a small woman-led nonprofit organization. Majority of our board are women. We believe everyone has a right to clean air, clean water, and toxic-free food. And we also convene Indigenous women and girls gatherings, an opportunity to educate women and girls on environmental health and justice. Also to empower them, how to contact your legislators, how to testify, how to write letters to the editor, so we're here. And as I mentioned, we're one of the few in the nation. I'm very proud to say that. And, ACAT has given us an opportunity to partner with our community. And I am so grateful for our leadership, Native Village of Gambell, Native Village of Savoonga, our communities, our working group that give us advice and guidance, and our academic partners. And, if it wasn't for this project, we wouldn't be a leader in the international level at the Stockholm Convention, using our data to ban toxic chemicals globally. And I just wanted to also mention that ACAT produced a report for the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on the Plastics Treaty, INC4, in Ottawa to inform the delegates of the climate crisis we're facing from microplastics. It's very wrong when we're finding microplastics in the placenta, the sacred placenta, our womb, where our children grew, and in our traditional foods. That's why we're committed to strengthen chemical and environmental laws locally, nationally, statewide.
Thank you, Vi. So our next question is a bit more general about reducing everyday exposures to toxic chemicals. And I know you mentioned, we've talked about that a bit earlier, and how these chemicals are especially concentrated in the Arctic, but just for everyday household chemicals for everyone, how can we reduce our exposure to these persistent chemicals and microplastics?
Another good question from Ella. Thanks for that question, Ella. Well, I think fundamentally there are a lot of things that we can do in our own homes to reduce exposures to chemicals and microplastics, but we also have to say that this is a problem that we can't shop our way out of. It requires holding agencies accountable. It requires sometimes litigation. We're involved in a number of cases against the EPA and other agencies because they're not doing their job to protect human health and the environment. And it also involved changing policy from a local to international level. We work at the international level because as we've described, these chemicals don't respect political boundaries. So we're very involved in the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. And just, in fact, last week got some major decisions to eliminate some of the world's most toxic chemicals, including the insecticide chlorpyrifos, a large industrial class of chemicals called medium chain chlorinated paraffins, and also a large group of over 200 PFAS chemicals, the long chain perfluorocarboxylic acid chemicals. So it really takes that kind of work. And, you know, here on Sivuqaq, our work is to hold the military accountable so these exposures to military contaminants don't continue and affect future generations. We work at the state level to change policy. We have a bill right now in the state legislature to ban the use of polystyrene plastic in food packaging and a number of other things to address PFAS and other persistent chemicals. There's a lot of, we could probably go on and on about this. We have a lot of information and fact sheets on our website about ways that we can personally reduce our exposures in our homes and the places where we live, work, and play. But ultimately, it's necessary to affect transformative change through policy and accountability.
Thank you. Yeah. Last couple of questions. In the list of demands in the complaint, this person's asking, could one of the demands be a complete and equitable healthcare facility for Sivuqaq? Yeah.
That's one of the requests that we have,
Mhm.
is to our big dream is to create Annie Aloha Institute. You know, Annie we honor her. She was very respected and smart and recognized, very well-trained healthcare provider. We would like to, our dream is to create the Annie Aloha Institute, where we provide capability to analyze toxic exposures, to create a detox center, but also as part of this demand and complaint is to provide adequate health care and screening of our most vulnerable Northeast Cape families and those families whose homes are on top of the waste site in Gambell, whose children have gone to school that's on top of the waste site, that play in that playground. Screening, because it's so hard to properly diagnose and treat environmental health effects. Convene experts from throughout the nation and globe, to experts in cancer, birth defects, all the illnesses that are linked to these legacy military toxics, to make sure that measures are in place to address the health harms, including screening of the most vulnerable, provide adequate proper diagnosis and treatment of environmental health effects, and so that our people and community can also, in the words of, I'd like to bring back again, Merle, a place of wellness.
Yes, thank you. So another question about what would be an appropriate population to compare your population to with respect to the adverse health impacts related to these chemicals?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I'll do my best to answer that one. In our studies, we generally compare the levels of contaminants that we find in the blood serum of the people of Sivuqaq with what's called NHANES, or the National Health and Nutritional Survey. And that's a study that's done about every 2 years, and it measures the levels of over 200 contaminants in the blood serum of people throughout the United States. So when we publish our information and we have results from our blood serum samples, we use that as a comparative level to look at how the contaminants in people of Sivuqaq compare with that national survey. And also we look at international data from the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program. We really look at all the literature and do a complete review to compare our results. Whatever data might be out there, we do a complete literature survey.
If I can add briefly, our tribe petitioned Agency for Toxic Substances Disease Registry to do a health consultation and health assessment. It was so frustrating. They were not transparent, they were not inclusive, and our tribe asked ATSTR to work with us since we have our data and have done this work for many years. And we lined up interviews for them, our people's knowledge of where the locations of the toxic chemicals were buried, how they witnessed their activities and occupation, and first-hand knowledge of their activities and occupation, where they buried everything, and like in Gambell. And we are still being discredited when we give our own observations in our health. In 1950, we had 1 case of cancer. And now it's not a matter of if we'll get cancer, but when. They added our community's knowledge about our health at the end of the report as health concerns. And they did not even include our data from this community-based project in that health assessment, which our tribe asked them to do. And they asked the state of Alaska to give an update on the cancer registry on Sivuqaq. They blame cigarette smoke for all our cancers. We had to do our own cancer registry. And these registries are hard for communities like ours that are small. Nationally, they're like 1 cancer in 100,000 people. So they're not reflective of small communities like ours that have multiple body burdens from legacy military toxics, from persistent organic pollutants, and now microplastics.
Thanks, Vi. And since we're at the half hour, just to close us out, I'd like to ask a final question about what was a standout experience for both of you from the DC trip, maybe something memorable or highlight?
What was memorable to me was the strong voices of our delegates who spoke from the heart, very personal health harms they have each individually faced. their knowledge, Indigenous people's knowledge that was shared. We are experts. And just that everybody was incredible. We had strong voices. Everybody was committed. It was back-to-back meetings with high officials. They're tiring. It's draining physically, spiritually. However, they did incredibly great. And the other one thing that I took away, the 22 years I've been doing this, Army Corps of Engineer, as we mentioned how we call them out, right? The experiences we have had. The Alaska District Project Manager, his name is Sean. It was the first time I heard from a federal official. I am so sorry you've had to do this fight. We should be fighting for you. To me, that was, I had never heard anybody speak from the heart like that and recognize our fight and struggle.
Thanks, Vi. I certainly agree with all of that. And I guess the thing that I would add is that we had the opportunity after our event, the National Press Club, the media conference, to sit down with Dr. Marcos Orellana, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Toxics, and have a listening session. And just to hear the empathy and the understanding and the interest, his interest in seeking justice for the people of Sivuqaq, as he heard the stories, the powerful stories of the people of Sivuqaq, was just a very welcome experience and a very powerful moment, I would say. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, there are two people in particular that I want to thank in addition to those that we've mentioned thus far. Dr. Samari Sinquadat Medina, our environmental health director here, and Dylan Jones, our community science coordinator, have done so much over many years now to help lead and coordinate a lot of this research at Northeast Cape and on Sivuqaq. So I wanted to call them out in particular.
Yes, they've become our Sivuqaq family. And also shout out to Dr. Marcos Orellana. He committed to listen to us. So I'm very grateful for that. Ikamsi kayo, Vikamsi. I hope you share our story and take action.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And one final shout out is to Renee, Annie Aloa's. In our culture, she would be Annie Aloa's granddaughter. Annie's sister is her grandma. Thank you for joining, Renee.
Thanks, everybody.
Renee Moyok. Igam si kayo, Vikam, can I love you. Thank you.
Yeah. Just
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for
a final
organizing this.
note.
Thank you, Sarah. Igam
Yeah.
si kayo, Vikam si. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just note for our participants, we'll have a recording of the webinar available on our website, probably later today, actually. And it will also be sent to your emails as well. We're really grateful to our speakers for joining us today and for everyone for tuning in and for your many amazing questions. And please keep an eye out for more Che Alaska webinars on the Che and ACAT websites, and we will see you next time.